Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joins us in this studio and virtually. Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum continues its operation today. It's year 9 of the war and day 343 of our fight for freedom. And now we will be talking about a very interesting topic about relations between Ukraine and Iran. Visiting us here is Igor Semyvolos, Executive Director at the Association of Middle East Studies. Good afternoon, Mr. Igor. Good afternoon. Well, let's start this conversation. Iran, maybe 1 year ago, we could not imagine that this country will be so extensively discussed on our agenda in all levels. So how do you see our relations with Iran in view of the conditions that we ended up in today? Well, I want to say that for a long time, the relations between Iran and Ukraine were quite of economic nature. So the key task that was built, so to say, by Ministry of Foreign Affairs for relations with the global south was only in economic plane, and all the Ukrainian embassies in that region, they focused their efforts on achievement of success in the economic front. So talking about Iran and dynamics of Ukraine's relations with Iran, I have to say that starting from year 2000, the dynamic was quite positive. There was a good economic dynamic. We effectively developed cooperation, the economic cooperation, regardless the fact that the building of a nuclear power plant and other activities related to such sensitive topics. I mean, sensitive for United States and Israel. So within the framework of discussions and negotiations with the partners in Israel, in United States, those activities were wrapped up, and we remember that until the middle of years 2000-2010, Ukraine stopped all the activities in the area of cooperation on nuclear power with Iran. However, Iran was remaining one of the biggest importers of Ukrainian grain, and it was heavily reliant on Ukrainian grain in terms of its food security. They were developing contracts in the area of oil and gas mining. There was an important project in airplane construction, and some even say that the project of cooperation between Antonov Construction Bureau and Iran, it helped Iran develop their UAV program further on. Well, the situation started changing just a couple of years ago. And obviously we started feeling those serious changes back in December year 2021, when Russia and Iran started very active cooperation, and they set forth the main areas of cooperation identified in the last year. So talking about this alliance between Russia and Iran, what's behind this alliance and their cooperation that everybody talks about? I mean, military cooperation, whether it can get more profound, and what kind of threat is it to us? Well, we have to remember the case of Syria, where both Iran and Syria, starting from 2015, they act as allies in war in Syria, and that was first and very important component of their cooperation, which laid fundamental for further events. Qasim Soleimani, the commander of the expedition corps, who was killed in 2020 by Americans in the airport of Baghdad, he was one of the promoters of these relations between Russia and Iran. Another important phase was when Russia acted as the lobbyist for Iran in international arena, in international organizations, and they were protecting Iran's interest, specifically when there were talks about nuclear deal. Russians were trying to maintain neutral approach in the context of renewal of a nuclear deal with Americans. But after the beginning of the war and implementation of sanctions against Russia, that country set course for closer relations with Iran and for creation of a military and political alliance. So from fostering format, they proceeded to the extensive teamwork. So how deep is this teamwork? We know that the UAVs are supplied by Iran to Russia, and then they go on missions for bombing Ukrainian cities. And as to the ballistic missiles, is this deal already in effect? Are those missiles already handed to Russia, and will they end up in our territory? And is there any deepening of such relations? Well, I will start with economic area. We see that Iran and Russia are joining their resources, they are joining their banking systems to facilitate the cooperation and minimize the aftermath of the sanctions. In the same way, there is an active reconstruction, the active building of a transport corridor, but I have to say that it may start functioning maybe in just a couple of years, and the key problem is still we see there are difficult relations between Iran and Azerbaijan. The agreement about UAVs was reached maybe in year 2021, in December 2021, for what I can judge, but the final resolution was taken after the visit of Putin to Tehran in July 2022. And the issue of mid-range ballistic missiles, those negotiations were started back then, but I have to say that Russia doesn't fully trust Iran, and in the same way Iran doesn't trust Russia to the fullest extent, and their relations are being built based on the principle who will betray whom the first. And there is still a discussion between Russia and Iran about the phases of supply of weapons to Tehran. We remember about the airplanes that Russia promised to deliver to Iran, maybe air defense capabilities, and whether it will be Iran who should first deliver the missiles to Russia. So both Iran and Russia keep postponing the final resolution. I think that the key problem is that in Iran not all the representatives of the political class favor the close cooperation with Russia, and part of their political establishment would like to return the nuclear deal with United States, but we see that after the statements by Antony Blinken, the Secretary of the State of the United States, the return to this standard of the nuclear deal as it was back in 2015, it's impossible. The attacks on the military infrastructure of Iran, who's behind that, in your opinion? This is the most complicated question, because accusations in relation of any country, I don't have any right to do so. It should be based on an ashtray principle before any country makes a statement about their attack on Iran's infrastructure, it's impossible to accuse anybody. In the same way, Iran says that the UAVs attacking Ukrainian cities are not theirs. They say that the name is changed from Shahed to Iran. But I would still like to share my expert opinion. So the UAVs were launched according to the most recent evaluation. The UAVs were launched from Iraq. Oh, no, from Iran. They were quadrocopters. They were not flying from abroad. There are probably some small devices, or well, maybe not small, but middle size. And there is some information that most likely they were launched from Iranian Kurdistan, but this information still needs verification. At least part of Iranian sources, they assert so, but they don't try to conceal that this operation was planned and executed by the agents of Mossad. Also taking part in that operation were local, so to say, organizations, Iranian organizations. We know about one such organization, Mujahideen Falk, which acts as guerrillas back from the 60s. They are left-oriented. They were fighting first Shah Pahlavi and then Ayatollahs. Well, they are now legal in the European Union. Europeans removed the terroristic title from them, and that organization was taking responsibility for sabotage acts in Iran, the killing of Muhandes, the engineers who were responsible for the development of the nuclear program of Iran. So let's talk about this triangle, Israel, Russia, and Iran. How the deepening of the relations between Russia and Iran is felt, and does it have any consequences for the relations with Israel? That's another very interesting question, because it's all very entangled there. We imagine that Iran and Russia are allies. However, there are some problems and distrust between them, and that distrust was built in the Syrian conflict, where Russia was saying that Russia won that war, and Iran was carrying the heaviest burden, and now they're getting most authorities in Syria, and this conflict seems balanced now. On the other hand, the Russians tried to hold Iran back from the active support of Ukraine and Israel from the support of Ukraine. So they had to remind Israel about the Russian proxy in Israel. So Israelis were saying the same way, we cannot keep calm because Russian beer is right by our side. So this is the complex that influenced their behavior. On the other hand, yet Russia was trying to convince Israel that at any moment they can provide Israel's security and not let Iran strike Israeli territory. How does it all cohere with the delivery of airplanes and air defense capabilities to Iran? Well, obviously this cognitive gap that was holding those three countries back from active hostilities, I think that this gap will only get bigger. Well, does it help actually in our relations with Israel? Well, not yet. Not yet, because you see, Israel puts it behind brackets. They try to solve their issues with Iran through Russia, and I haven't seen any indicators for the changing of their policy? Well, maybe the visit of a new Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel, El Cohen, maybe his visit to Ukraine will change that situation, or at least we will hear some new ideas, because so far there were no new ideas from the beginning of the cadence of Netanyahu as the prime minister. We haven't seen anything, both Bennett and Lapid, and again Netanyahu. We haven't heard any new ideas. All those ideas are obsolete and not interesting. Well, getting back to the military infrastructure facilities, does that attack influence us, and in what way, and does it influence positively? Well, the UAV strike on the facilities in Isfahan are made in the interest of the countries who executed it, not in the interest of Ukraine. And obviously, it does not influence us directly. However, we've heard yesterday and the day before the reactions of top-level Iranian officials who quote the tweet of Podolyak, who said that Ukraine warned you, so that they see it, they recognize it as the indirect influence or indirect confirmation of Ukraine's involvement. Well, it's absurd. However, there are such threats in address of Ukraine. At this stage, at this phase, it does not influence us directly, but everything depends on how the situation will evolve. Following the logic of Iranian political process, we have to answer how they will do it, and this is how the situation will develop in general, and development of the situation will directly influence the war in Ukraine. Well, I appreciate all the information you provided. Dear colleagues, your questions, please. Nadia Yurchenko, Ukrinform. The United States included 7 drone manufacturing companies in their sanction list. How sensitive is it for Iranian industry now that Iran spends a couple of decades under sanctions? Maybe there will be some exchange in experience for making their way around the sanctions between Russia and Iran. Well, thank you for this question. I think that the issue of sanctions is not exaggerated for Iran. Iran was exempt from most sanctions after entering into the nuclear deal, and until year 2018, even United States were imposing sanctions against Iran. Well, the destructive role of the nuclear deal requires more explanation, and the resources that Iran was getting from 2015 to 2018 that were channeled for improvement of missile program and UAV program, they played the key role in this situation that we ended up in now. I want to remind you that European Union did not impose any sanctions so far. However, it's obvious that Iran violates the United Nations Security Council resolution, and they supply the drones in contrary to that resolution. So in addition to all the obvious things, the country which is under sanctions, they try to find opportunities. There is a huge gray market. So if you take the residues of those UAV which hit the manufacturing facility in Isfahan, and you compare them to the spare parts, so you compare them to the parts of the UAVs manufactured in Israel or Iran or Ukraine, wherever, all those parts will be similar because there is a huge gray market and the spare parts are available everywhere, and there are a lot of countries which ensure the functioning of that market, and they are not necessarily the neighboring countries, the countries neighboring to Iran. Well, if there are no more questions on the floor, a question that concerns all the Ukrainians, the missiles that should be coming from Iran to Russia. What are the chances that they already arrived to Russia? What's your assessment of this situation? Well, obviously, I've heard that information that Russians handed a number of missiles, but they did not hand over the platforms for launch. Well, I cannot either confirm or debunk this information, but at the same time, I can say that the final decision, the final resolution of about handover of the missiles is not yet taken. But I want to say that before 2023, any sale of missiles is the severe violation of resolution of United Nations Security Council. Well, without those platforms, the launch of size missiles is impossible. I'm not a big military specialist, but obviously, yes, it's impossible. Well, thank you for this conversation. I'm reminding you, joining us was Igor Semyvolos, the executive director of the Center for Middle East Studies. Follow our announcements. Trust in our armed forces, and glory to Ukraine.